The morning Yemi Adeyinka walked back into Seoul, she found out that Baek Sung-jin had kept a search alert on her name for 14 months. She did not find out from him. She found out from his assistant, a young woman named Park So-yeon who had been working for Sung-jin for 3 years and who had, apparently, spent 14 months watching the alert generate results and watching her employer read those results with the specific, private attention of a man who had given up the right to contact someone but had not yet found a way to give up the awareness of them. So-yeon told her this in the elevator of the Baek Industries tower on Yemi's second day back in Seoul, in the frank, slightly conspiratorial way of someone who has decided that the truth serves everyone better than the alternative. She said, "He has a search alert for your consulting firm. He reads every result. He's been doing it since January of last year." Then the elevator opened and So-yeon stepped out and left Yemi alone in the steel box with that information, descending 12 floors to the lobby with the specific physical sensation of a world rearranging itself around a fact she had not asked for and could not now unknow. 14 months. He had been following her professional existence through search results for 14 months. Not contacting her, she would have known. She had made herself findable by design, one of the small, deliberate acts of a woman who refuses to make herself invisible because someone else did something wrong. Findable but not contacted. Present in his awareness but not in his life, which was a distinction she was going to need some time to think about. She pressed the button for the lobby again. The elevator was already going to the lobby. She pressed it anyway. This is where the story begins. Not in the lobby and not in the elevator, and not even in the 14 months that came before. It begins further back, 14 months and 3 days, to be precise. In a boardroom on the 28th floor of the Baek Industries tower, in a glass-walled room that she had sat in a dozen times in 9 months of contract work, and that she had sat in that afternoon without knowing it was the last time, without knowing that what she was about to see would cause her to leave a city she had been building a life in and not return for over a year. She had not been supposed to be there. This was the thing she kept returning to in the months that followed, the detail that had the texture of irony without the grace. She had been in the wrong meeting. The board presentation had been scheduled for Conference Room C, and the Cultural Intelligence workshop she had been invited to observe had been moved to Conference Room D, and the room shared a glass wall, and from the wrong seat in the wrong room, she had had a direct sight line to the wrong thing. She had seen the slides. 18 months of her work, presented to a room full of people she did not know, under a heading that said Baek Industries West Africa Market Intelligence, Internal Research Division. Not her name. Not her firm. Not a footnote, not an acknowledgement, not the single, subordinate attribution that would have been inadequate but at least honest. Nothing. Her methodology, her framework, her field research, and her cultural analysis, and the specific intellectual architecture that she had spent 3 years building before she ever came to Korea. All of it presented, as if it had been generated inside the building by people who worked in the building, which they had not, which she had. She had sat in Conference Room D for 45 minutes, watching this happen through a glass wall. She had not said anything. She had understood, with a cold, comprehensive clarity that sometimes arrives in moments of genuine shock, that saying anything in that room at that moment would be wrong. Wrong for the reason that it would allow her to be managed, and she was not going to be managed. She was going to leave, and she was going to do it in the specific, quiet way of someone who has decided that the room no longer deserves her presence, and she was going to do whatever came next from a position of her own choosing rather than from the reactive, destabilized position that confrontation in that moment would have produced. She had left. She had gone to her office, the small one, the temporary one, the one she had been given as a contractor rather than as an employee, which distinction she had now been made very aware of in the most expensive possible way. She had packed her personal items. She had done this with the systematic calm of someone who had packed and repacked enough times to know that the activity of packing was itself a form of thinking, a way of processing the enormity of a thing by organizing the small physical components of it. She had gone to the legal department. She had not called him. She had not gone to his office. She had not sent a message. She had understood in the practiced, self-protective way of a woman who has learned that her first instincts are usually correct, and that the instinct in that moment was to leave before she was offered an explanation that she might accept before she had time to decide whether accepting it was in her own interest, that the right move was to go. The NDA had been waiting. She had read it carefully, All 4 pages, which she suspected put her in a minority among people who had signed it under similar circumstances, and had found in it a settlement figure that was significant, and an attribution clause that was invisible, and a silence clause that was total. She had signed it, not because she had been coerced, because she was 28 years old, and the settlement figure was real, and the alternative was a legal fight in a country that was not hers against a company with resources she could not match, and she was a practical woman. Her grandmother had told her, "Yemi, know the difference between a war you can win and a wall you cannot climb. Spend your energy on the war." She had gone to the airport. She had spent the next 14 months in Lagos and Accra and London. She had rebuilt. Not everything, not the specific, particular thing that her work in Seoul had cost her, the thing that was not professional and had no settlement figure attached to it. But she had rebuilt the professional part with the systematic, focused energy of someone who is running slightly hot with the contained fuel of a specific, located anger, and the work had been very good. Her methodology had been published in a peer-reviewed journal, fully attributed, her name, her framework, her years. It had been cited 47 times in the 14 months since publication. She had been invited to conferences. She had taken the conferences. She had come back to Seoul because the Nigerian-Korean Trade Consortium had offices here and a project that required her specific skills, and she was not going to let one man make a city unavailable to her. This was a matter of principle. She had several matters of principle. She kept them organized. She had not anticipated the search alert. She did not think about it again until she was sitting in the Insadong coffee shop that had been her particular place in the 3 years she'd spent in Seoul the first time. The one with the corner table and the menu that had not changed in a decade, and the owner who recognized her when she came through the door and said, without ceremony, "The ginger tea," which was either a remarkable memory or an indication of how regularly she had been there. She was sitting with her ginger tea and her laptop and the first day's materials from the consortium project when the door opened and Baek Sung-jin walked in. It was not fate. She did not believe in fate. She believed in the specific density of Seoul, which was a city of 25 million people organized around a relatively small set of neighborhoods where people of professional significance tended to eat and drink and think, and in which the probability of encountering someone you knew was simply higher than the mathematics of population would suggest, because the population was not evenly distributed, and neither were the coffee shops. He saw her before he reached the counter. She saw him see her. She watched his face do something that happened in the space of a single second and which she would analyze afterward with more care than it deserved. The quick, comprehensive cascade of recognition and something else, something that she could not name precisely, but that had the quality of a man who has been rehearsing for a moment and finds, when the moment arrives, that the rehearsal was inadequate. He ordered. He stood at the counter with his order and looked at her across the room, and she looked back at him across the room, and the specific, charged quality of that 30 feet of coffee shop between them was the quality of a space that contains history. She did not look away. She was not going to look away. She had left. She had done the quiet, dignified, self-protective thing 14 months ago. She was back now, and back meant back in every sense, and she was not going to rearrange herself spatially to make his comfort easier. He came to her table. He stood at the edge of it. He said, with the directness that she had always respected in him even when it was producing information she did not want, "You're here." "I'm here," she said. "The consortium project," he said. "Yes. I saw the announcement." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "You have a search alert." He went still. Not the managed stillness she remembered from boardrooms and difficult conversations and the specific, controlled way he had of receiving unwelcome information without allowing it to reorganize his face. A different stillness. The stillness of a man who has been found out and knows it and has decided, in the split second available to him, that managing it would be wrong. "So-yun told you," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "May I sit down?" he said. She should have said no. She gestured at the chair across from her. He sat. He put his coffee on the table. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "I know what I did." "Tell me anyway," she said. "The full version." "The full version," he said, "is going to take longer than—" "I have time," she said. "I have the whole afternoon. The consortium's first full session isn't until tomorrow." He looked at her. The direct, comprehensive look that was, she had remembered correctly, his most characteristic mode, not performing attention but actually giving it, the kind of attention that required the other person to be as fully present as the giver of it. All right, he said. The full version. He told her. He told her from the beginning, not from the day of the board presentation, which was the part she had seen, but from the day before it, which was the part she hadn't. His cousin, Min-jun, had submitted a counter-proposal to the board, a competing market entry strategy for West Africa, structured as a direct challenge to the approach Sung-jin had been developing. Min-jun had done this without warning, presenting it as internal research from his division, and Sung-jin had received the counter-proposal the evening before the board presentation and had spent the night reading it. I recognized your work, he said. In his proposal. Not your name. He hadn't used your name. But the framework. The analytical structure. The way the cultural segmentation had been built. I had been working with your methodology for 9 months, and I knew what it looked like when someone else was presenting it without understanding it. She held her coffee cup. He'd gotten access to my preliminary research files, she said. It was not a question. Someone in his division had, Sung-jin said. I found out how afterward. It doesn't matter now. What matters is what I did with what I found. He looked at the table. I had 12 hours. The board presentation was at 2 the following afternoon. Min-jun's counterproposal was already in the board packet. My options were, he stopped. He tried again. I could present the original strategy with your full attribution and let the board comparison reveal that Min-jun had taken your work without credit, which would have destroyed his credibility and potentially the credibility of the whole West Africa initiative in the crossfire. I could withdraw my presentation entirely and call for an investigation, which would have delayed the initiative by 6 months minimum and given our Korean competitors exactly the window they needed to enter the market we'd spent 9 months preparing for. Or I could, he stopped. Or you could take my name off your version too, she said. And present both proposals as internal research and let the board choose the better one and address the attribution question afterward. He met her eyes. Yes, he said. That's what I did. The Incident Cafe noise moved around them. The espresso machine. The students at the next table. The owner moving between tables with the unhurried competence of someone who has been managing the same space for 20 years. You chose the initiative over my name, she said. Yes, he said. And then I chose to address it afterward, and afterward I couldn't, he stopped. He looked at his hands. Afterward I understood what I had done. What it looked like from your position. You were in that room, and you saw your work presented as someone else's and you left, and I had sent the NDA instead of calling you, and calling you after the NDA felt like, he stopped again. Like what, she said. Like asking you to listen to an explanation while I was still in the position of having benefited from the wrong thing, he said. I couldn't make the call. Every time I drafted something I understood that words were not enough, and that I didn't have the right to ask you to receive words that weren't enough. So you set a search alert, she said. So, I set a search alert, he said. Very quietly. Because I couldn't contact you, but I could not know that you were, he stopped. He looked at her. That you were all right. That your work was going where it was supposed to go. The journal article, he stopped again. You read the journal article, she said. 47 citations in 14 months, he said. The methodology is exactly as strong as you knew it was. She sat with this. She sat with the image of him, at whatever hour of whatever morning, opening a search result and reading her journal article, her name at the top, her framework in the body, her years in every citation, and whatever that reading had cost him. She sat with it and did not yet decide what it meant. The initiative, she said. The West Africa expansion. How did it go? He looked slightly surprised by the question. Well, he said. The board chose my version of the strategy. 3 of the 5 markets exceeded first-year projections. The Nigerian consortium became our most productive overseas relationship. He paused. Your methodology works exactly as designed when it's applied correctly. And in the second year, she said. The second-year review went to the board last month, he said. I attributed it fully. Your name, your firm, your framework. The board now knows whose work it was. He paused. 14 months late. Yes, she said. 14 months late. A silence. The weight of it sat between them on the corner table. "There's something else," he said. He said it in the voice of someone who has been carrying a piece of information and has decided that this is the moment to set it down regardless of what setting it down produces. "Tell me," she said. "I've been in contact with the Korean-Nigerian Chamber of Commerce," he said, "for the past 6 months. They're establishing a cultural intelligence research fund, a permanent grant for methodology development in emerging market contexts. I've been working with them on the structure." He looked at her. "I proposed your name for the inaugural fellowship. They contacted you last month." She went still. "The Sejong Fellowship," she said. "Yes." She had received the letter. She had read it 3 times and had been unable to identify how her name had come to their attention and had put it in a folder she had labeled, "Investigate." She had not yet investigated. "You arranged that," she said. "I proposed your name," he said. "The committee makes its own decisions. They wanted you because of the journal article and the conference presentations, not because of me. He stopped. "I wanted to make sure your name was in the room." She looked at him across the corner table. At this man who had done something wrong and had known it completely and had spent 14 months following the evidence of what she was becoming and making sure her name was in rooms she hadn't even known about. The anger was still there. It was a genuine, located anger, and it had not resolved, and she was not going to perform its resolution before it had actually happened. But underneath it, and not replacing it and not requiring it to move, something else. She thought about her grandmother, Mama Adeyinka, who had been alive until Yemi was 24 and who had said about betrayal specifically because Mama Adeyinka had very specific opinions about specific things. "Yemi, the question is not whether a person did wrong. People do wrong. The question is whether the person knows what they did was wrong and whether they are trying to become someone who would do differently. Those are the only 2 questions. Everything else is noise." She thought about the search alert, about the journal article and the 47 citations, and the name on the second-year review, about the Sejong Fellowship and the name in the room. "The man at the East Pillar," she said. "Lee Bong-chul." He looked confused. "I'm sorry." She shook herself slightly. "Forgive me. Wrong story." She looked at him. "The morning after the board presentation, when I had already gone. What did you do?" He was quiet for a moment. "I went to your office," he said. "At 7 in the morning. Before anyone else was in the building. I sat at your desk for," he paused. He looked at the table. "For about an hour. I thought about calling you. I understood that calling you was wrong. I understood that the NDA was wrong. I understood that everything I had done was wrong in a way that did not have an obvious remedy, and I sat at your desk for an hour, and then I went to my office and I worked, because working was the only thing I knew how to do when I didn't know what else to do." She held her coffee. It had gone cold. She had not noticed it going cold. "Why didn't you fight Min-jun?" she said. "Formally. Report what he did." "Because I had already used your work without your name," he said. "I was not in a position to report someone else for doing the same thing in a more blatant way. I had spent my standing on the wrong decision." He paused. "Min-jun left the company 4 months ago. The formal investigation, which I did eventually request, produced sufficient grounds. He left on his own terms, but he left." She had not known that. He left. Yes. She sat with this new piece of the picture. Min-jun gone. The second-year review, with her name. The Sejong Fellowship. The search alert. The hour at her desk at 7 in the morning when the building was empty. "Sung-jin," she said. He looked at her. The direct, comprehensive look. "Say it plainly," she said. "Whatever you came in here to say. Not the managed version. The plain thing." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him assemble himself, not the way a person assembles a performance, but the way a person assembles the specific courage required to say the true thing to the person it will most affect. "I have loved you," he said, "since the 3rd week of our professional relationship. I have been afraid of it since the 4th. I made a decision under pressure that treated your work as instrumental, which is the worst thing you can do to a person whose mind is the thing you most." He stopped. He found the word, admire. He looked at the table. "And I've spent 14 months trying to be someone who would have made a different decision, and I'm not certain I've succeeded, and I'm not certain I have the right to be asking you for anything, and I'm asking anyway because..." He looked up. Because the plain thing is, I love you. And the plain thing is, I'm sorry. And the plain thing is, I want to do this right if you'll give me the chance to do this right. The cafe noise was all around them and the ginger tea was cold, and through the window the Seoul afternoon was the specific pale gold of October, and somewhere in the distance a delivery motorbike was doing what delivery motorbikes in Seoul do, which is exist loudly and without apology. She looked at him. She thought about Mama Aginola's 2 questions. The person knows what they did was wrong. Yes, completely without qualification. The person is trying to become someone who would do differently. 14 months, a search alert, a second-year review with her name on it, a fellowship proposal, an hour at her empty desk at 7 in the morning. She thought about the plain thing. I'm not forgiving you today, she said. I know, he said. I'm not forgiving you either, she said. I'm sitting here. I'm letting you say the plain thing. That's what I have for today. He nodded. Once. The nod of someone who has been given less than they wanted, and more than they expected. The consortium project, she said. It runs for 3 months. Yes, he said. I'll be in Seoul for 3 months, she said. Yes, he said again. She looked at him. Buy me another tea, she said. And tell me about the West Africa expansion. The version you didn't send to the board. The one that had my name on it. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, the components of one. The specific expression of a man who has been handed an unexpected gift and is still calibrating whether he is allowed to receive it. He got up. He went to the counter. He ordered 2 teas. He came back. He sat down. He told her about the expansion. The full version, the real version, the one where her name was on every slide and her methodology was cited on every page, and the work was the work she had done, intact, exactly as she had built it. She listened. She listened with the quality of attention that the work deserved, which was the same quality of attention she had always given to her own work, and she felt, underneath the still-present anger, the specific satisfaction of hearing her work described correctly, completely, with the care and accuracy of someone who had understood it. They stayed in the cafe for 2 hours. When she left, she said, "Same time tomorrow?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I'll be here." She walked out into the Seoul afternoon. She did not look back. Behind her she heard him, through the window, order something else, which meant he was staying in the cafe after she had left, which she filed under, data point, to be interpreted later. She walked. The Seoul October was cool and specific, and the city was doing what it always did, which was everything at once, which was the thing she had missed about it in 14 months of not being here. She walked and she thought about 14 months and a search alert and the plain thing and what it meant to sit at a corner table with someone who had done wrong and say, "I'm sitting here." She thought about her grandmother, about the 2 questions. She thought, not today, but possibly. The days that followed had the specific quality of a thing that is happening cautiously and knows it is happening cautiously and is willing to proceed anyway. She came to the cafe on Tuesday. He was already there. She came on Wednesday. He was already there. By Thursday, it had the quality of a plan that had never been called a plan, which was, she had learned from the Insadong Sundays of a different story, one of the more reliable ways for plans to become real. They talked. Not about the betrayal, not every day, and not as the primary subject. They talked about the consortium project, which she was finding more interesting than the briefing materials had suggested, because the cultural intelligence dimensions of Korean-Nigerian trade were more complex and more generative than she had anticipated, and he had opinions about this that were not stupid, which she appreciated. She had spent 14 months in rooms where her opinions were the most sophisticated in the room, and it was, she admitted this to herself without dramatic qualification, not unpleasant to be in a room with someone who could push back. He pushed back well. Not combatively, not the performed opposition of someone who thinks disagreement is the same as engagement. He pushed back specifically, with the evidence of someone who had read the primary materials and had thought about them, and she found herself, more than once, in the middle of a conversation that was genuinely changing the way she thought about something, which was the rarest and most valuable thing another person could do for her intellectually. On the Friday of the first week she said, without preamble, "Tell me about the morning you sat at my desk." He looked up from his coffee. "What do you want to know?" "What you were thinking," she said. "The hour. What you were thinking for an hour." He looked at the table. She watched him decide to answer honestly rather than strategically, which was a visible process in him. The brief, internal negotiation between self-protection and truth. I was thinking, he said slowly, about the first time I understood that what you were doing was different from what other consultants did. You were in a briefing session, the third week, the Lagos partnership briefing. A senior partner made an assumption about Nigerian business culture that was, he paused, incorrect. Confidently, and completely incorrect. And everyone in the room received it without response because he was senior and the assumption was culturally comfortable for the people in the room. And you said, without any adjustment for the room's comfort, very precisely and with full citation of your primary research, that is not accurate, and here is what is accurate. She remembered that session. She remembered the specific, measured way she had said it, not aggressive, not deferential, simply correct. And afterward, he said, I understood that what you brought to the work was not just the methodology. It was the willingness to say the accurate thing regardless of what the room wanted to hear. And I sat at your desk for an hour thinking about the fact that I had done the opposite. I had let the room's comfort determine what I said, and what the room wanted to hear was a slide deck with no complications and no external attributions and no acknowledgement that the knowledge had come from somewhere outside the building. He looked up at her. I sat there for an hour understanding that I had done to you exactly what that senior partner had done to the Lagos research. I had treated accuracy as optional when the room made it inconvenient. She held her coffee. She thought about accuracy and the room's comfort and the specific, daily cost of being the person who says the true thing regardless. That's the right thing to have understood, she said. I know, he said. I wish I had understood it before. Yes, she said. Me too. She looked at him across the table. She had been angry for 14 months with the clean, organized anger of a woman who knows why she is angry and what it is attached to. The anger had not gone. But it had, over the 7 days of the cafe and the full version and the pushback conversations, begun to differentiate itself from the other things, begun to separate from what was underneath it, which was more complicated and less organized and had to do with the third and fourth weeks and the hour at the desk and a man who had set a search alert because he couldn't contact her but could not know. On the Saturday, she said, Tell me about the Sejong Fellowship. The full version of how that happened. He told her. He had been approached by the Chamber of Commerce 8 months after she left. They had been following the discussion around her journal article and had been thinking about establishing a research fund in the cultural intelligence space. They had asked him, in his capacity as a senior figure in the Korean West African business community, for names of researchers who represented the state of the field. He had given them one name. He had then spent 4 months working with the chamber on the fellowship structure, without compensation, without any formal role, purely in the capacity of someone who understood the field well enough to help design the terms of the award. You built the fellowship around my methodology, she said. I built the fellowship around the gap in the field that your methodology addresses, he said. The committee built the rest. They are genuinely excited about your work independent of anything I said. I gave them your name. The rest is the quality of what you've done. She looked at him. She thought about the gap in the field. She thought about the fact that he had spent 4 months working on a fellowship structure that would make her work more visible, without telling her, without any expectation of credit, in the specific, quiet way of someone who has decided that making something right is more important than being seen to make it right. Mama Ajinola had said, watch what people do with their time when they don't have to do anything. The time reveals the person. She thought about the search alert and the hour at the desk and the 4 months building the fellowship structure. She thought about his time. On the Sunday of the second week, she arrived at the cafe first and was already seated when he came through the door. She watched him see her, the same cascade as the first time, recognition and something else, but this time the something else had changed. The rehearsal quality was gone. The something else was simpler and more direct and had the quality of something that has stopped needing to check whether it is allowed. He sat down. He ordered. He looked at her and said, How's the consortium project going? The cultural mapping is more complex than I expected, she said. There are 4 distinct regional business cultures operating within what the briefing materials treat as a single market. The intervention design is going to need to account for that. Which regions? He said. She told him. He listened. He asked questions. She answered. He asked better questions. She answered those and found, in the answering, 3 things she had not yet fully articulated about the cultural segmentation that became clearer in the articulating. "You just figured something out," he said, while you were explaining it. "Yes," she said. "Does that happen often?" "The thinking through talking. With the right person to talk to," she said. He looked at her. He understood exactly what she had said. He did not make it into a moment. He simply received it and moved on, which was, she thought, the right response to a thing that was being offered carefully and did not need to be grasped at. The weeks continued. She came to the cafe. He was there. They talked about the consortium project and the West Africa expansion and the fellowship and the methodology and the specific, contentious question of how cultural intelligence should be weighted in market entry decisions, about which they disagreed in a way that was productive and occasionally loud in the specific, focused way of people who care about being correct more than they care about winning. The anger continued to change. Not to diminish. She was precise about the distinction which mattered. Not to diminish, but to differentiate, to clarify, to become the specific, located thing it actually was rather than the general, encompassing thing it had been when it was her only organizing principle for what had happened. The anger had been her way of knowing, in the 14 months of not being here, what had happened and why it mattered. Now that she was here, and the full version had been offered and received, the anger could afford to become more specific. The specific thing it was. She had been hurt. The work had been taken. The name had been erased. She had left a city she was building a life in and spent 14 months rebuilding, which was real and had cost something real. That was the anger. It was real. It deserved to be named as real. Underneath it, the specific, complicated other thing, which was that the man who had done the wrong thing had been trying for 14 months to undo it. Had been trying in the specific, quiet, unannounced ways of someone who understands that the doing of the wrong thing has already used up his standing, and that whatever comes next has to be done without standing, without expectation of credit, without any assurance that the person you wronged will ever know. She knew. She was deciding what to do with the knowing. In the 3rd week, on a Wednesday, she arrived at the cafe to find him already there with 2 teas, both ginger, both at the temperature she had specified once, and he had not forgotten, and a folder on the table. She sat down. She looked at the folder. "What is that?" she said. "The second-year board review," he said. "The original version. With your name." She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "You kept it." "I kept it," he said. "I always intended to. I kept it because I intended to show it to you, and I didn't know when I would have the chance." She opened the folder. She looked at the cover slide. Baek Industries West Africa Market Intelligence, Cultural Framework Design. And underneath, in the specific position that attributed the work correctly, methodology developed by Dr. Yemi Adeyinka, Adeyinka Cultural Intelligence Consulting. Framework copyright Yemi Adeyinka, 2023. Her name, her framework, her copyright. She turned the pages. Every slide. Her name on every slide. Her methodology cited on every page with the care and accuracy of someone who had understood the work and was attributing it to its source, with no ambiguity and no qualification. She turned the last page. At the end, a note she had not expected, handwritten in Korean, in his handwriting, which she recognized from the margin notes she had seen on documents in 9 months of working in his building. She read it slowly. Her Korean was adequate for reading, if not for the full register of the written. It said, "This work belongs to Yemi Adeyinka, who is the best thinker I have ever had the privilege of working with. Whatever this company does in the West African market, it does on the foundation of her intellectual generosity." The fact that this was not said clearly enough, early enough, and in the right rooms is a failure of mine that I am trying to make right. BSJ. She sat with her hands flat on the last page of the folder for a long moment. "You wrote that note," she said. "Yes," he said. "When?" "The morning after the board presentation," he said. "The morning I was at your desk." She looked up at him. "You wrote it that morning?" "Yes." She thought about a man at an empty desk at 7 in the morning writing a note in the margin of a document that had done the wrong thing, as if writing the note could undo the wrong thing, as if it could not undo it but could at least be the record of the intention to undo it. She closed the folder. She sat in the Incident Cafe, with a cold October light coming through the window and the ginger tea going warm in her hands, and the specific weight of a decision that had been building for 3 weeks settling into the place where decisions settle when they are finally ready to be made. "Sung-jin," she said. He looked at her. The direct, comprehensive look. The one that gave you its full attention because it believed you were worth the full attention. "I'm going to tell you something," she said. "The plain thing." "Tell me," he said. "I came back to Seoul because I refuse to let you make this city unavailable to me," she said. "That's the reason I told myself. And it's true. But it's not the only reason." She held his gaze. "I came back because I have been thinking about you for 14 months, and not all of what I've been thinking was anger. Some of it was the other thing. The thing that was there before the boardroom." She paused. "I want to be clear. The anger is also still there. The wrong thing happened. The wrong thing cost me something real. That doesn't go away because you set a search alert and wrote a note at a desk at 7 in the morning." "I know," he said. "But," she said, "Mama Adeyinka, my grandmother," she said, "the question is not whether a person did wrong. The question is whether they know what they did was wrong, and whether they're trying to become someone who would do differently." She paused. "You know. I can see that you know completely and without qualification. And you have been trying. 14 months of trying, without knowing whether I would ever see it." He was very still. "Yes," he said quietly. "So I'm saying," she said, "that I am willing to continue this. The cafe. The conversations. The thing that was there before, and is still there even though it's more complicated now." She paused. "On one condition." "Name it," he said. "Plain things," she said. "Always. Even when they're difficult. Especially then. No managed versions. No decisions made under pressure that you don't tell me about until 14 months later." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "That's the condition I should have been operating under from the beginning." "Yes," she said. "It is." A silence. Not the weighted, difficult kind. The other kind. The kind that has been cleared of something and has space in it now. "The fellowship," she said. "I'm going to accept it." "Good," he said. "It has nothing to do with you," she said. "The work merits it on its own terms." "I know," he said. "I told you that." "I'm saying it so that we're both clear," she said. "The fellowship is mine because of the work. What happens here?" She gestured at the table, the cafe, the space between them. "That's a separate thing." "Two separate things," he said. "Both real." "Both real," she said. She picked up her tea. He picked up his. The cafe moved around them in its specific, unremarkable way. The espresso machine, the students, the owner moving between tables, the Seoul afternoon going about its Seoul afternoon business of being a city. She thought about the Han River, which she had missed for 14 months, without exactly admitting that she had missed it. She thought about the Incident streets and the October light and the corner table that had been her particular place and was still, apparently, her particular place. She thought about 14 months of building, in Lagos and Accra and London, something strong enough to carry her back here, and the fact that being back here was, against the expectations of the part of her that had preferred to be invulnerable, the right place to be. She thought about the plain thing. She thought about the work, which was hers, which had always been hers, which had continued to be hers even in the 14 months when someone had presented it without her name, because the work belonged to the person who did it, and that did not change regardless of what happened to the attribution. The work was hers, and it was strong, and it had 47 citations and a fellowship in its name, and it was going to continue being hers, and being strong regardless of what happened next. She thought about what was going to happen next. She thought about him, at a desk at 7 in the morning, writing a note in the margin of the document that had done the wrong thing. She thought about 4 months of fellowship structure and 14 months of search results and the second-year review with her name on every slide. She thought about Mama Adeyinka, who had not been wrong yet. "Tell me about the Nigerian consortium," she said. "The version you didn't present to the board." He looked at her. The components of the smile again. More decided this time. More willing to arrive. He told her. He told her about the consortium in the specific, full version of someone who has waited a long time to tell the story correctly and has now been given the opportunity and is not going to waste it. She listened. She asked questions. He answered. She asked better questions. He answered those. They stayed until the cafe closed. When the owner began stacking chairs at the tables around them, they looked up from the conversation with a specific, slightly disoriented quality of people who have been inside something and are only now registering the world around the outside of it. The third week brought the crisis. She had not expected a crisis. She had been building, carefully and with full awareness of what she was building, something that required patience and the specific, daily practice of plain things, and the willingness to let the forgiveness arrive in its own time rather than on a schedule. She had been building it with confidence, which was perhaps the thing that made the crisis, when it arrived, feel more disorienting than it should have. It arrived on a Thursday in the form of a phone call she took at 7:14 a.m. in her hotel room before the cafe. The number was a Korean number she did not recognize. She answered because she was in Seoul on professional business, and answering unknown Korean numbers was part of the arithmetic of being in Seoul on professional business. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, precise in the specific way of someone who has prepared what they are about to say. He identified himself as a journalist from a major Korean financial news outlet. He said he was writing a story about Baek Industries' West Africa expansion strategy. He said he understood she had been the original architect of the methodology behind the strategy. He said he had documents. He said documents with the specific, weighted emphasis of a person who wants you to understand that documents mean something more than paper, indicating that the methodology had been presented to the Baek board without attribution to her. He said he was calling to ask whether she would like to comment. She was very still. "Where did you get the documents?" she said. "I'm not able to share my sources," he said. "What documents specifically?" she said. He described them. They were, from his description, internal Baek Industries board documents, the original presentation and the second-year review. Both versions. The one without her name, and the one with it. "The second-year review has my name on it," she said. "Yes," he said. "The current version does. The original presentation does not. I am writing about the gap between the two." She sat in her hotel room and thought rapidly. The story he was writing was true. The facts were accurate. The original presentation had not attributed her work. The second-year review had. The gap between the two was real and documented, and had cost her something real. She had signed an NDA that she had not read carefully enough, which she was regretting specifically right now. "I need to think about this," she said. "Can you give me until this afternoon?" "I can give you until 3 p.m., he said. She hung up. She sat for exactly 2 minutes doing nothing, which was her process for absorbing large information. 2 minutes of stillness, then motion. At the 2-minute mark, she picked up her phone and called Sung-jin. He answered before the first ring had completed. He said, "I know. So-yeon just called me. The journalist contacted the company's press office an hour ago." "You knew before I called," she said. 30 seconds before, he said. "I was about to call you. What are the documents?" she said. "How does he have them?" "Min-jun," Sung-jin said. His voice was even. She had learned to read the evenness. It was not calm. It was the surface that his anger sat underneath when his anger was present and he was choosing not to lead with it. Min-jun has board access to the internal document archive going back 5 years. He lost his access when he left the company, but he retained copies of materials he had downloaded before he left. "We've been managing the exposure risk for 4 months. "You knew this was possible," she said. "I knew it was possible," he said. "I did not know Min-jun had given the documents to a journalist. I thought his interest was in the settlement negotiation from his departure, not in," he stopped. "I should have anticipated this. I didn't." She absorbed this. "What's in the documents that he gave?" she said. "From what the press office has established, the original board presentation without your attribution and the second-year review with it." A pause. "The journalist is going to write about the gap regardless of what either of us says. The question is whether the story is about a company that corrected a wrong and continued to correct it, or about a company that tried to suppress a wrong until it was forced into the open." "Those are 2 very different stories," she said. "Yes," he said. "One of them is true. One of them is not." She sat with this. She thought about the NDA. She thought about what she had signed, and what it permitted and what it did not. She thought about 14 months, and the search alert, and the note at the desk. She thought about what the journalist's story would look like if she said nothing, and what it would look like if she said the true thing. She thought about the condition. The plain thing always. I want to see the NDA, she said. Today. Before 3. I'll have it sent to you in the next 20 minutes, he said. I've already asked legal. And I want to talk to you, she said, before I decide anything. In person. I'll come to you, he said. The cafe, she said. 1 hour. He was there in 45 minutes. She was already there. He sat down. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was, she thought, the appropriate response to a situation that had just become significantly more complicated than it had been at 7:13 that morning. The NDA, she said. You have it, he said. Did you read it? I'm reading it now, she said. She had the document open on her phone. She read. She was a careful reader, and she read the full document in the way she always read full documents, completely without skimming, with the specific attention of someone who understands that the important thing is usually not where you expect it. She found it on page 3. The settlement agreement included a standard confidentiality clause that covered the specific facts of the original dispute. And this was the thing that her rush to the airport 14 months ago had caused her to miss. The clause had an exception. The exception read, disclosure required for the protection of the signing party's professional reputation or intellectual property rights. She put her phone down. The NDA has an exception for protecting my professional reputation, she said. Yes, he said. I know. You know. I reviewed the NDA when we were preparing for the potential press exposure, he said. 4 months ago. I identified the exception, and I understood that if the story broke, you had the legal standing to speak to it. He met her eyes. I did not contact you to tell you because he stopped. Because you had no right to contact me, she said. Yes, he said. But also because I was hoping it wouldn't break. I was hoping Minjun's interest was purely financial and that the documents would not become a press story. He looked at the table. I should have contacted you regardless. I should have told you the risk existed and let you make your own decision about what to do with the information. I managed it instead of telling you. He looked up. I am aware of the irony. She looked at him. She thought about what he had just said. The plain version of another wrong decision, delivered without waiting for her to find it herself. Different from 14 months ago. Different in the specific way that mattered. You're telling me now, she said. Yes, he said. Immediately. She held his gaze. That's the condition working, she said. Yes, he said. That's the condition working. She sat back. She thought about the journalist and the story and the two versions of it. She thought about the NDA exception and what she was legally permitted to say. She thought about the plain thing. I'm going to speak to the journalist, she said. I'm going to tell him the true version. The original presentation did not attribute my work. The second-year review did. Both of those facts are accurate. The reason the second-year review attributed it, the 14 months between them, the search alert, the fellowship, the note, that is also part of the true version. He was watching her. You're going to tell the full version, he said. Yes, she said. I'm going to tell the full version because the full version is more accurate and more complete and more useful to anyone trying to understand what actually happened. She paused. It is also more fair to you than the version that stops at the original presentation. And she stopped. She found the word. I am interested in being fair to you, even though you made a wrong decision, because you have been trying to become someone who would do differently, and that trying deserves to be part of the record. He was very still for a moment. Then, you don't have to do that. I know, she said. I'm doing it because it's accurate. Not as a favor. She looked at him. I want to be clear about that. This is not forgiveness. This is accuracy. I know the difference, he said. Good, she said. She called the journalist at 2:15. She told him the full version. She told it plainly, without editorializing, with the specific care of someone who understands that the story being told about her work is itself a form of work and deserves the same rigor she brought to the work itself. She told him that the original presentation had not attributed her methodology, which was wrong. She told him that the second-year review had, which was the correction. She told him that between the original presentation and the correction there had been 14 months of effort by Baek Sung-jin to make the record accurate, and that she was in a position to confirm this from her own knowledge of the situation. The journalist listened. He asked questions. She answered them. The questions were good. He was a good journalist, which was its own complication because good journalists asked the questions that revealed the texture of a thing rather than just its surface. When he asked whether she had a professional relationship with Baek Sung-jin currently, she said, "I have a relationship with Baek Sung-jin that I am not going to characterize for this article. What I can tell you is that the relationship is not in conflict with the accuracy of what I have just told you." He published the story 2 days later. It was fair. It was accurate. It did not editorialize. It told the gap between the two presentations, and it told the correction, and it told, in her words, the 14 months of effort that had happened between them. It was not a comfortable story for Baek Industries, but it was the true one, and she had understood when she made the call that comfortable was not the standard. Sung-jin texted her when the story went live. He said, "Thank you for the full version." She texted back, "It was the accurate version. There's a difference." He texted back, "I know. Thank you for both." She put her phone down. She went back to the consortium project's reweighted regional analysis. The work was good. The reweighting had clarified the cultural segmentation in exactly the way she had predicted, and the findings were stronger and more defensible for it. She thought about accuracy and the plain thing, and the full version, and the difference between forgiveness and fairness. She thought about the condition. She called her mother that night. She had not told her mother she was going back to Seoul. She had told her mother she was going to Seoul, without the back, without the weight of the back, presenting it as a new contract in a city she had worked in before rather than a return to a city she had left in a particular way for particular reasons. Her mother was a perceptive woman and had probably understood more than Yemi had said, but her mother was also the specific kind of perceptive that knew when not to press. Now, sitting in the hotel room that was adequate without being home, with the Seoul night visible through the window, she called. Her mother answered on the second ring. Her mother always answered on the second ring, which Yemi had once timed across 17 calls and confirmed was genuinely consistent. She had asked about it, and her mother had said, "The first ring is for deciding whether to answer. The second ring is for the answer," which was, she had thought at the time and continued to think, an extremely complete philosophy of decision-making. "You saw him," her mother said, before Yemi had said anything beyond hello. "I saw him," she said. And I let him tell me the full version," she said. A pause. Her mother was from Ibadan and had the Ibadan woman's specific relationship with information, receiving it completely before responding to it, turning it over, checking its weight. "The full version being what?" her mother said. She told her. She told her about the counterproposal and the 12 hours and the decision under pressure and the NDA and the hour at the desk and the search alert and the second-year review and the fellowship and the note in the margin. Her mother was quiet for a long time. "Mama," she said. "I'm thinking," her mother said. She waited. Outside the window, a siren moved across the city and faded, which was the sound Seoul made to say, "Something happened. It is being addressed. Continue." "Your grandmother," her mother said finally, "used to say that the difference between a mistake and a character is repetition. One wrong decision, even a significant one, is a mistake. The same wrong decision made again is character." She paused. "He did not make it again." "No," she said. "He didn't. He has been spending 14 months trying to unmake what he made," her mother said, "without asking you to witness it, without making it about being seen to try." "Yes," she said. "That tells you something," her mother said. "I know," she said. "I'm sitting with what it tells me." "Don't sit too long," her mother said. Your grandmother also said, "The person who sits with a feeling until they understand it perfectly is the person who misses the feeling entirely." A pause. She was talking about mango season, but it applies. Yemi laughed. She had not expected to laugh. The laugh surprised her, and then felt right, the way some surprises do. "I'm not sitting too long," she said. "I'm coming back tomorrow." "To the cafe?" her mother said. "To the cafe," she said. "Good," her mother said. Simply. with the specific, direct satisfaction of a woman who has raised a daughter to be both principled and practical and is pleased when she sees the two operating together. She hung up. She sat with the Seoul night. She thought about mango season, and the feeling you miss if you sit too long, and the second ring that is for the answer. She thought about the plain thing. She opened her laptop. She opened the fellowship acceptance email that had been sitting in her drafts for 6 days, half-written, not sent. She read it. She added a paragraph. Clear, professional, the specific warmth of someone who is genuinely honored without being performatively grateful. She sent it. She closed the laptop. She looked at the city. She thought, tomorrow. The second week had a different texture from the first. In the first week, they had been two people at a corner table in a coffee shop, navigating the specific, careful geography of a thing that had been broken and was being reassembled in the full awareness that reassembly and the original were not the same object. The second week was something else, something that had taken the geography of the first week and found, inside it, more room than expected. She brought him a problem on the Tuesday. Not a personal problem, a methodological one, a genuine intellectual snag in the consortium project's cultural mapping that she had been working around and had not found a clean path through. She brought it to the cafe because she had understood in the Monday session that he was someone she could think with, and thinking with someone was a different category of activity from the conversation they had been having, and she wanted to know whether the category held up when the subject was the work. It held up. He engaged with the problem the way good thinkers engage. Not by immediately proposing solutions, but by asking questions that helped her see the shape of it more clearly. He asked about the data source for the regional segmentation. He asked about the fieldwork methodology. Had the interviews been conducted in English or in local languages, and if in local languages, who had translated and had the translation been back-translated for accuracy? He asked about the sample distribution across the 4 regions she had identified. The questions were right. Not just technically right, epistemically right, the questions of someone who understood that the accuracy of the finding depended on the integrity of every layer of the research process. She answered each one, and in answering found the thread she had been looking for. The sample distribution across the 4 regions was not uniform, which meant the cultural mapping was being pulled toward the better sampled regions, which was introducing a systematic bias that was not visible in the aggregate analysis, but became visible when you looked at the regional breakdown. There, he said, when she had traced it back to its source. That's the root. Yes, she said. She was writing rapidly. The fix is a reweighting of the regional samples before the cultural segmentation step. It's not a fundamental problem with the methodology. It's a data quality issue that was introduced in the fieldwork phase. Correctable, he said. Completely correctable, she said. 2 days of reanalysis. The findings will be stronger for it. She finished writing. She looked up. He was watching her with a specific, attentive expression she had come to recognize as his version of pleasure. Not demonstrated pleasure, not performed enthusiasm, but the genuine, internal satisfaction of someone who has been in a good conversation and knows it. You're good at this, she said. The thinking with. The questions. You're good at receiving them, he said. Most people don't want questions. They want confirmation. Most people haven't spent 3 years building a methodology that gets stronger every time someone asks it a good question, she said. He looked at her. Does that include the questions that revealed the sample bias? Especially those, she said. The bias was there. Better to find it now than after the client has built strategy on a flawed analysis. He nodded. She watched him do the thing she had noticed first. Receive information and let it settle before responding, the specific cognitive respect of someone who treats what he is given as worth the time it takes to fully process it. I want to ask you something, he said. That is not about the methodology. Ask, she said. The 9 months, he said. Before. What was that for you? Professionally, and he stopped. The other way. She looked at him. She considered. She had been asked to be honest, to give plain things, and this was a question that deserved a plain answer, even though the plain answer was more exposed than she might have chosen. Professionally, she said, it was the most stimulating engagement I had taken. The scale of the market entry challenge and the sophistication of the cultural dimensions, I was using everything I had built and finding the edges of it in ways that generated new thinking. It was exactly the kind of project I had been building toward. She paused. The other way. The other way was she stopped. She found it. Unexpected. I am organized about feelings. I keep them in their appropriate categories and I tend them at appropriate times. And then you were in rooms where I was working and you treated the work as if it deserved the full attention of a serious person, and you asked good questions and you received the answers the way the answers deserve to be received. And that is not something that happens as often as you might think. You thought I was in the wrong category, he said. She looked at him. What category? The category of person you work with, he said. Not the other category. Yes, she said. And then I noticed you weren't in the wrong category. And I managed that information for the remaining months, because you were my client, and because she stopped. Because, he said. Because I have spent my career being very clear about the distinction between professional and personal, she said. And I was not going to compromise the work or the professional relationship for a feeling that I was not certain was reciprocal. It was, he said, very simply, without any management. I know that now, she said. I didn't know it then. Or, I suspected it and chose not to act on the suspicion because acting on a suspicion about a client felt like exactly the kind of thing that people who are serious about their work do not do. He was quiet for a moment. And then the boardroom, he said. And then the boardroom, she said. Which resolved the question of whether I was going to act on the suspicion by making the question irrelevant. He looked at the table. She watched him absorb this, the specific, full way he absorbed things, letting them settle before he responded. I want to tell you something, he said. The plain thing, since that's the condition. Tell me, she said. There was a Tuesday in the 7th month, he said. You were in the Lagos briefing. The senior partner made the incorrect assumption. You corrected it. Precisely, with full citation, without any adjustment for the room's comfort. He looked up at her. After the session, I stayed in the conference room for 15 minutes after everyone left. I was trying to understand what had just happened to me. She said nothing. She waited. What had happened, he said slowly, was that I had watched you say the accurate thing in a room that did not want the accurate thing, and it had reorganized something. Not about the work. About what I understood to be possible between two people. That you could be in a room with someone, and they could say the true thing every time, regardless of what the room wanted, and that would be the condition for being with them. That would be the requirement. The plain thing always. He looked at her. I didn't know how to become someone who operated that way. I understood that you were, and that I was not. And then the boardroom happened, and I understood that I was still not, and I understood it completely, and I could not undo it. She sat with this. She sat with the image of him in the conference room for 15 minutes after everyone had left, trying to understand what had just happened to him. You're becoming someone who operates that way, she said. I'm trying, he said. The trying is visible, she said. For what it's worth. It's worth a great deal, he said. They sat with that. The cafe moved around them. The ginger tea was warm. She gathered her things. He gathered his. They walked out into the Seoul evening together, not holding hands, not yet, but in the specific proximity of people who have decided that the distance between them has been for long enough, longer than it needed to be. The city was doing its evening thing. The specific, luminous density of Seoul at the end of a working day. The packed streets, the street food smells, the sound of a place that does not stop for small things or large ones. Same time tomorrow, she said. He looked at her. The direct, comprehensive look. Same time tomorrow, he said. She walked. He walked beside her for the 2 blocks to the junction where their directions diverged. At the junction, she stopped. She looked at the city. She thought about the Han River and the 14 months and the note at the desk and the search alert and the thing that was there before and was still there even though it was more complicated now. She thought about the plain thing. She turned. She looked at him. She said, I have loved you back. Since, I'm not sure since when. Since the first month, possibly. Before the boardroom. And I have been angry about that for 14 months. Because loving someone who has done wrong makes the wrong harder to organize, and I like my feelings organized. She paused. I'm telling you because, plain things, always. He looked at her. She watched his face do the thing it had not done in the 2 weeks of the cafe, fully, completely, without any management, resolve into the underneath expression. the one that was simply there. Yemi, he said. I know, she said. I'm not forgiving you at this junction on a Wednesday evening. I want to be clear about that. I know, he said. But I'm telling you the plain thing, she said. Because that's the condition. Yes, he said. Thank you for telling me. She nodded. She turned. She walked toward her apartment through the Seoul evening. She did not look back for the first block, and then she did at the second block, and he was still standing at the junction watching her walk. She looked at him for a moment across the distance. He raised his hand. Not a wave, something quieter. An acknowledgement. She turned back and walked on. The city moved around her. The October light was gone, and the Seoul night was beginning its own business, and somewhere ahead of her the Han River was doing what it always did, which was moving in the direction it had chosen long before anyone was watching. She thought about what came next, which was 3 months of the consortium and a fellowship with her name on it, and a corner table in Insadong, and the plain thing, always. She thought about Mama Ajinola, who had been right about most things. She thought about the Han River, which had been there for 14 months and had been waiting, as rivers do, without any urgency about the waiting. She walked. The city continued. This was not the end of the wrong thing, and it was not the beginning of the forgiveness. It was something more specific and more livable than either of those. It was the moment when a woman who had been away for 14 months and had come back on principle decided, in the full possession of her own plain things, to stay. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter is where the forgiveness arrives, and it arrives differently than you think.